Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoROM podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. So welcome back to the podcast. This is Aebhric OKelly. I am here with Eirik, and we are in the Barfoozer pub after the Combat Medical Care Conference. Eirik, how did the conference go for you?
The conference went pretty well, I think. It was a great conference, actually. I was impressed of the location and the venue, and the organizers have really made an effort bringing this conference up to one of the biggest conferences in Europe, I think. I think we talked about 36 countries and over 1,300 people attending to this conference.
Yeah, so it's up there with Solma now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I've been to Soma 3 or 4 times now, and I think Soma still is a little bit bigger. But I think if they keep on with this and get more published or more advertising on this conference, I think this will be not a competitor, but similar to Soma.
Yeah. So both you and I gave workshops, and we gave presentations. So what was your workshop about?
So I did a workshop about hypothermia. Funny you should say that, because people was asking me when I supported your workshop on tropical medicine, how can you do a workshop on tropical medicine and then turn it over to a hypothermia workshop? But I think actually it went well. We had about 24 people at the workshop. The max was originally 20, but we got 24. The thing that we were talking about on this workshop and let the people try was basically my idea of how to dress in Arctic climate. I had discussion with the NATO Center of Excellence Winter Warfare or Arctic Warfare Center. So they contributed a lot with some great knowledge and scientifically proven knowledge for how to dress the individual soldier. So I think the feedback I got afterwards on that topic was that they really appreciated and saw how important clothing is for cold environment, especially when you're thinking about you cannot overdress and you cannot underdress. So you have to balance a fine line. When you're working, you need to take off clothes, and when you're sitting still, you need to put on more clothes to keep preserve the heat. The second part of the workshop was how to treat a casualty in an Arctic or a cold environment. And this is one of my really, really big things that I want to discuss with people, because when I was an instructor at ISCC, I saw in the beginning all the new medics, they were like trauma naked. Doesn't matter what kind of injury it is, everybody gets trauma naked. And I think that's a bad thing. We need to consider the climate and the injury pattern to see how much clothes, how naked we're going to take our casualties. And if we are doing the casualty examination according to the March principle, we also need to undress, have a look at it, and then cover up, undress, cover up, undress, cover up, so the casualty doesn't lose heat during your examination. Because as you know, that if we can never reproduce heat for the patients, we can only prevent them from losing more heat. So if they are already hypothermic, you can never get them back into 37 plus Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but
98.6.
Oh, yeah. 98.6. That is saving. So I think that the big takeaway from that lesson, and which also the people told me that attended that workshop, was that, yeah, you're right. We can only prevent them from losing more heat and keep them as stable as possible during the exam. So yeah, I think it went well.
Yeah, I enjoyed the hypothermia workshop. We did some improvised hypothermia wraps based on the WMS concepts.
Yep.
And you brought in some, so we did minimum, better, and best. So minimum was the hypothermia wrap from WMS. The better was something you brought from Norway.
Yes, so I was in cooperation with the Sea Rescue School in Horten in Norway, so I got to borrow some of the good kits, expensive kits also. But you can make from the, if I go to the top end, you have a Norwegian company producing something, I don't know the name of the company, but it's a ready burrito wrap kind of thing, but it's very high end. But you can also make the one in between, which is more like you use a rescue blanket or a garbage bag or something plastic that keeps the patient from isolated from the ground. Then you use a sleeping bag and some layers for underneath the patient, and then if you have, you can put some ready heat or stuff on that one to keep the patient from losing more cold. You will not, as many people, and you exactly pointed out, ready heat is not a way to warm up the patient. It's just to keep the patient from losing more heat. And I really like your input on that when we were doing the workshop. So we did minimum, better, and best from your plastic bags and clothing that was around to the high-end stuff that is out there.
Good. And then I did a tropical medicine workshop where we had, again, there was supposed to be 20 people, but 24 people showed up. So luckily we had enough kit, and we showed them RDTs. So we had malaria RDTs, we had dengue RDTs. Everyone did a rapid diagnostic test. We brought our field microscopes, our Newton field microscopes. So we had 5 of those that they looked at malaria slides that I got from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And then we had 5 desktop microscopes so they could see proper views of the malaria. And I thought it went well. A lot of them had never heard of malaria concepts, and we kind of deep dive a bit into malaria life cycle. And it was a good way for them to get some hands on the basic skills.
Yeah, I think because you also had a couple of guys and girls that had been deployed a lot and also knew a lot about microscope. We did have some doctors in there, and they were really appreciating the benefit because, as you said, and the participant concurred, was that this is knowledge that you need to keep up to date every time. You need to work on microscopy, and we also had Dr.
Mike Shertz.
Shertz in the class, and he was also contributing quite a lot on his knowledge. So it was a good workshop that you presented, and also Aebhric, you follow up on that one with a speech.
Yeah, this afternoon I had another lecture on tropical medicine updates, and I talked about the top 5 killers: the malaria, the ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndromes, the diarrheal disease, the AIDS, HIV, and the T is tuberculosis. And we talked about how to quickly assess and find focusing on malaria, and having RDTs, needing 2 RDTs to determine that your casualty is malaria free. So I was at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine a couple weeks ago for a week on laboratory work, and Dr. Claire Rogers was brilliantly explaining the rapid diagnostic testing, and she was saying that they're 95 to 99% accurate, but they look for different parts of the proteins found on the plasmodiums. So the better option was to have 2 different types of rapid diagnostic testing to make sure that you have a negative. So if someone comes up negative and they still show signs and symptoms of malaria and they're in a malaria environment, we do 2 rapid diagnostic tests that look at 2 different types of protein structures. Yeah, and then that will make sure that we don't have malaria.
And I really liked, I think that's a quote from our tropical expert Jason Jarvis that says that anybody with a fever, doesn't matter where he comes from, if he's in the tropics or he's been in the tropics, he has malaria until proven otherwise.
Yeah, we hit that pretty hard, that everyone has malaria if they are showing signs and symptoms of a fever. Yeah. And because of global warming, we are seeing malaria in south of France. We're starting to see infectious diseases in Texas and Florida because of global warming. The mosquitoes are causing transmission from person to mosquito. So yeah, malaria does not mean, oh, I've been to Africa, I may have malaria. No, you've been to Texas, you may have malaria. So yeah, it's for the operational medic, it's really important to rule out the big sick, the big killers first. And malaria is still killing people.
Still going to be there. And even though, as you mentioned on the conference, that there are also some positive news with some vaccines coming out now for malaria.
Yeah, so they vaccinated 1.5 million kids in sub-Saharan Africa on the new mRNA-based vaccine for falciparum.
Yeah. So we might see some good results down the line there and starting also vaccinating the adults.
Yeah, so we'll see how it works with
See how it
the
works.
kids. And
So yeah, and it was a great talk. I was listening into it, and I think the audience really liked it. So after you did that one, I followed up with another talk for patient documentation, and the topic was to document or not to document. That's not a question. So basically, it's due to my years in service in the ground, on the ground, and also as a flight paramedic in Afghanistan. I think about the research from the U.S. Rangers. I think it's about 90 to 92% of all casualty coming into damage control resuscitation or to the hospitals. They don't have any information about the point of injury treatment. And I had a presentation on why this is important to have documentation also from the point of injury. So the medic that's receiving the casualty on a helicopter or the hospital can get a heads up, and they also know what kind of treatment, especially when it comes to drugs, because it's important to know what kind of drugs has the patient received before. So the medic on the helicopter or the doctors in the hospital start to give more drugs of the same, for example, TXA or antibiotics. They need to know have that been started, and that will also prevent the delay of examination of the patient if they know what's been done before they receive the patient. So that was a I think was a good talk. I presented the Medic tool from PT Medic, which is an app that is actually out there for you guys if you want to test it on Google and on
Apple.
Apple. But the takeaway point is that we need to emphasize on documentation, because the other thing about that side is it will actually keep science moving forward. Because if we don't have the information on what medics are doing in the front line, we cannot investigate and bump up the treatment or make the treatment better. We need the evidence-based medicine to make sure that we are going in the right directions.
We need to learn from the current operations, and if we don't have that documented, we're going to have to relearn these in the next war.
Yeah, and that was another topic that one of the presenters, I can't remember who, but there was another presenter that talked about the treatment in Ukraine. And on that side note, we also have translated this app, the Medic tool, to Ukraine. So there's actually 400 people downloading it for medics in Ukraine using that app as we speak. And I'm my current job, as you probably know, Aebhric, was as the OIC of CCAT teams in Norway, and they are flying about. You had a podcast on that, I think, with Björn and Håkon.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they've flown about 1,300 patients from the hub in Poland and out to Europe. And what I asked them about, how was the patient recorded? How was the patient documentation? And they said that from the point of injury and back to the first treatment facility, it was actually good. They had good documentation, but from the treatment facility, the hospitals, they didn't have any. So I'm not saying that was because of medics, but I say that medics on ground in Ukraine are doing good documentation for their casualty until they deliver them.
We need that, and there's so much. How much research is going to be there with all this data that they are collecting? What data they need to collect more data, but the data they're collecting, there's going to be tons and tons of PhD level research done on the current conflict, on how patients' outcomes are changed with various ways of the treatment. And this conference was fantastic because we had quite a few Ukrainians who presented uh, on some of the concepts or some of the problems they have from the surgical side, from the evacuation side. And I was profoundly impressed with the level of people that they brought in for this conference.
Yeah, it was a real. So this was a conference where we actually could get some real information from the battlefield, as the battlefield is still evolving out there. So we really got some good talks about how are they coping with the lack of equipment, the lack of medics, and how they are mitigating that one. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, so it was 2 days, and we had workshops throughout, and three different. What were the three different tracks? So you had the main track,
Special
soft track,
operation.
and then there was a Thames one that you could
Yeah.
only go in if you're a cop.
Yeah. So I presented the medic too at the Thames one for the cops, and I got some good feedback, especially from the German special force, or what you call it, the SWAT team, kind of similar in
Yeah,
Germany.
yeah,
They were very interested in documentation, because it's not only documentation from the military side, which we know that military is pushing the envelope. They are in the front line of developing medicine, but I think also we will see in the coming years, it's crisis management, like the earthquake in Turkey, like big shootings in cities in Europe. We will see that they will have problems with coping with that, and they also need to document, especially if it's in a rural area. I know it if it's like say in the middle of a big city where you have 10 minutes ambulance drive to the nearest facility where they can treat you. That will not be a thing you should use. You should not document too much and use time for documentation. You should only write down on a piece of paper or in the forehead or whatever they did before. But when you are in an austere or a rural environment where it takes more than 30, 45, 50 minutes to bring the casualty to the final destination, you should document what you've done.
it's really important, and we were listening to some of the Ukrainian medics talk about evacs taking 12 hours to
Yeah.
get out due to the current operational situation.
Yeah, and that was actually a good point that actually I haven't thought about before. When we're talking about prolonged field care and we're talking about evac, we're always talking about a helicopter coming in, picking up the patient, or a land vehicle coming in. The problem in Ukraine was that it's not the distance, it's the danger in
It's access.
the access,
Yeah.
because everybody's, or the Russians are shooting at you. They're throwing mortars at you. They're throwing drones at you, and you cannot evacuation because they will watch you in daytime. So the best way to evacuate patient was in nighttime. So then, if you have a casualty at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you probably have to treat him and stay with him until dark, and then start thinking about evac. So that was something that I learned from this conference, that we had to think about not only the distance, we also have to think about how can we evacuate safely the patient, or the safety of the evac teams.
Right. So when looking at prolonged field care, the ruck truck house plane isn't working. So
Well,
here in Ukraine, you can do the ruck and truck, and you're
yeah,
kind of stuck at the truck phase.
yeah,
So we may need to completely rethink what our truck phase is in Ukraine in prolonged field care, and put more concepts, more skills within the truck phase.
yeah. I think we have to rethink a little bit of all. I won't throw the principle of the rock truck house plane out the window, but I will be starting to think about, because this war will show us that we need to think about what is the medic, what are the capabilities, the training, and the medics need to have, and I think we need to bump that up.
Agreed. And I mean, the four phases has worked in the past, and the next conflict they might work as well. But what we're seeing in Ukraine is they get the ruck phase, and then they put them in a vehicle. They can't go to the house phase because the house gets bombed, and
Yeah.
the orcs are targeting the quick clinics, the hasty clinics, the austere clinics. So the medics aren't able to take them to a house phase at all. It's truck phase until they can get back to a safe environment where they can finally put them into a hospital.
Yeah, so basically they might get the casualty out from the point of injury and back to a house or a rubble house or whatever. So we need to rethink the house phase as not a clinic that we can set up and we can evacuate to and have all our nice equipment in it. We need to think, what can we bring with us out and have a little depot just behind the front line or something, so we can easily evac them to there. But we need to think about this equipment has to be very light and very maneuverable, so we can easily extract from that site and maybe go to the next house, or the next house behind that, a barn or whatever. So yeah, we need to do some thinking about that.
So one of the Ukrainians was talking about underground clinics,
Yeah.
and they have limited areas on where there's some sort of underground structure that's there before the war, but that is where their house phase is.
Yeah, and actually, funny you should mention that because in the 90s, when I was deployed the first time to Bosnia in '93, I was located. That was in '95, I think. A couple of years later, I was doing a redeployment down there, and I was in one of the safe havens that the UN called it, in a place called Gorazde. And I'm not going to go into the history, but people probably recognize Srebrenica, Shepa, and the killings there. And they tried to do the same in Gorazde, and we had to evac our hospital. That I was a part of the Norwegian medevac team in the hospital, and we had to go into a bunker in a bank. So we had to bring all our equipment that we could while they were throwing grenades at us. And this is not similar. I'm not saying it's similar to Ukraine, but I was in a small village, no access, and we had to go into that bank bunker. We was escorted by the British SAS and set up a little clinic down there.
Wow.
Be ready to treat casualties. So we need to think about how best mitigate casualties with minimum equipment that is portable in the house space, because the house is not safe all the time.
No.
We need to move, maybe.
No. Yeah. So they were saying that there's 60-kilometer safety. So if you're in a truck phase, you're in a truck, you're moving at least 60 kilometers an hour, then the tanks can't hit you, the drones can't hit you, and that's your safety net is going. And these roads are bombed out and bounced. Imagine being in the back of an SUV, bouncing around with a tier 1 casualty, and all you have is your ruck kit and your truck kit. And that is you for hours.
And that's not the only thing, because we had one casualty in Gorazde where we had to go out with our APC, but we couldn't use lights because the snipers were on the hill. So if we used lights, they were starting hitting us. And we went into this compound, picked up a casualty, and we're going back to the bank. And actually, the driver, he couldn't see shit because this was in a confined little village. And while we were moving out, he had to turn on his headlights. And my SAS escort told me, sorry for the French, but turn off your headlights. So we're going to take some incoming. And 2 seconds later, I heard 50 cals coming into the APC. So he turned off the light. We went back, and everything went okay. So yeah, but that's also something you have to think about, because it's in that environment, and also in Ukraine, you might not have lights in your APC if you cannot blind all the windows, and you have to work out on the back of an APC with your minimal equipment.
Yeah.
So,
or an SUV.
Or an SUV.
And so you had to black out the back windows, and you're working on this guy bouncing around and going 60 kilometers an hour.
Because nowadays in Bosnia, the snipers saw you, but now the drones are seeing you.
Yep.
So yeah.
That's kind of that's what we learned from the Ukrainians who are speaking at this conference. Is the drones are the eyes, and the drones are now they have NVG capabilities, and they're targeting clinics. They're targeting the medics as a priority target.
And now you're talking about the big problem, a big debate here, because as we saw one of the picture from the drones, you can see the Red Cross on the ambulance pretty good. So then it comes into the discussion on the Geneva Convention, which I'm not going to take for or against, but as long as you put a big Red Cross on your clinic or your ambulance in a war zone, you will get.
They're going to get hit.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the Ukrainian speakers had a video from their handheld smartphone of tanks, Russian tanks, going the opposite direction, and they were on this broken road with a casualty in an SUV, and the Russians didn't look at the SUV as anything other than scared civilians. Well, they were scared civilians, but they didn't get engaged because it was an SUV.
Yeah, if they had a big Red Cross on the side.
Oh, the tanks would have stopped and engaged.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into that political debate on yes or no, but it's a reality.
Yeah. So there is a lot of lessons learned that we heard in the last couple of days, and a lot of adjustments that we need to do on how we treat casualties in eastern Ukraine.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the TCCC still works, the March still works, the prolonged field care still works, but we're just stuck at that truck phase. So my challenge to those of you listening to this, think about how would you set up your clinic when it is your SUV? Then it's some civilian, if you're lucky, it's an SUV. We are hearing stories about 4-seater Lada sedans as evacs. So how would you set up? So you have your ruck kit, good, no problem. Now you have your truck kit, and that's it. So how would you change your setup if those were your two steps in your prolonged field care?
That's very important. There needs to be some smart guys or somebody who with the experience can start working on that one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was kind of a high point for me. The rest of the lectures were quite interesting. You mentioned the Turkish earthquake lecture was quite good, and of course it was good to talk to loads and loads of people that I've run across from different conferences in different areas.
Absolutely, and I think that for you listeners out there, you should absolutely put in the calendar for next year. I think it's in Paris.
Yeah, in October.
October in Paris, and next year is back in. I think the general surgeon said it's going to be back in Ulm or in little village nearby Ulm. So I think this is a great opportunity, not only to learn a lot, but also to meet people and connect and get some really good information.
Yeah. So if you want cutting edge, up-to-date information, the Combat Medical Care Conference in Ulm, Germany, and every other year it's in Ulm, Germany, which is basically Munich, and the other odd years it is in Paris, which was also a pretty amazing conference. So put in your calendar to be in Paris in October of 2024, and we will see you there.
We'll see you there.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine Foundation. If you would like to earn CPD credit for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credits, free access to the virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on the college website, which is CoROM, CoROM, CoROM.org.